Welcome, goedemorgen, soyez la bienvenue. I'm proud to have Betty Alice Erickson and Allan Erickson with us for the 3 days, and this will be an historic event. It's not a workshop, it's not a training, it's a happening, a coming together. You are handpicked as an audience. You're a small audience because for once this workshop is not only about us, the attendants, it's especially about them, their material, their memories, and the way they will offer their memories of their father and his work when he was a young, vigorous person alive, not the known purple-clad Erickson in a wheelchair who, when he scratched his nose, 7 books came out within 6 months after that, with 75 metaphorical meanings of the scratching of the nose of Dr. Erickson. We will have real-life information about how it really was, their version. Now they're brother and sister, so they tend to quarrel a little bit. We cannot come closer to the clinician that Dr. Milton Erickson was than meeting, working, learning from VA. So we just invite you to make something happen.
For many years, I begin my workshops with a list of rules of Daddy's life, because what Daddy is portrayed as, literally makes me crazy. Because he is portrayed that he was this metaphorical, gentle, frail person who never, ever was dynamic and forceful and told you exactly what to do. I was talking to my older brother about this before I came, and he just laughed because I was telling him what we had planned. And he said, that metaphorical person is not the father I grew up with. And it is not the father I grew up with.
It's not the father I grew up with.
And I will tell you, the one story I always begin workshops with, to give people a flavor, even though this is a workshop, to give people a flavor of Daddy was so dynamic. When I was in my early 30s, I was visiting, and I said, Daddy, I was sitting on the arm of a chair, and he was reading a newspaper. And I said, Daddy, if you're such a great psychiatrist, how come you can't give me a diet that will make me lose weight? And Daddy lowered the newspaper, and he looked me in the eye, and he said, do you really want a diet that will make you lose weight? And I said, no, Daddy. And he said, all right. favorite stories about what he did was, which he kept his whole life. When he was a little boy, when the snow fell in Wisconsin, and it was virgin snow, he would get up really early. And he would walk to school, and he would tramp a path to school. Because his goal was to make the path more and more circuitous. And then he would hide behind trees. And watch people walk on the path that he had made. To see just how away from the goal he could make the schoolhouse, he could make the path, and people would still tramp on the path he had made, and how out of the way he had to make it before people would break their own path. Now, that's really creative and really smart, and I don't think that's totally unique. Some people would think of doing that and do it, but the difference is he did this year after year after year, and that's one of the components, I think, of being a genius. What was it Edison said? 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. So he practiced this his whole youth, going sideways and more. And if you look at the therapy he did, that was a lot of his therapy. Daddy was, as many of you know, the second of 9 surviving children. And he was born in a dirt floor, a cabin that was set into the mountainside.
So they didn't have to build that wall.
Right. And great insulation in Orem, Nevada, where his father, my grandpa, was a silver miner. And when he was 5, Grandma Erickson, his mother, decided she could not educate the children properly, and so they went in a covered wagon across the prairie, across from Nevada to Utah, where they then took a train back to Wisconsin, which pleased Daddy no end, because everybody went west in the covered wagon. He went east in the covered wagon, which is really a metaphor for his life, because he was really totally unique in so many ways. The family was a farm family, poor farm family, because this was the turn of the century. And he grew up, and he was always very different than other kids, and he talked about that he was different. And when I look back, it's very comforting, because Daddy, I truly believe, was genius. I am clearly not a genius. I can assure you my younger brother is not a genius. So this eliminates any competition, because geniuses are very rare. And he was just different and geniusy his whole life. And I'm smart, but I'm just a normal person. polio when he graduated from high school that summer, which was a life-changing event. The story about him almost dying and fixing the mirror, okay, that one is true, and he told that his whole life.
Yes, that is really true.
Can you tell it again?
He overheard the doctor telling his mother,
Telling his mother,
that your son will not see the
Morning.
morning sunrise. And his first thought was this was a terrible thing for any doctor to tell a mother. So he asked his mother, to arrange the dresser so that he could see the
but
sunrise.
I'm not sure she knew why he
No,
was asking
she didn't
it.
know.
She didn't know. And he asked it so he could have the mirror pushed in a certain way so he could see the sunset.
And the sunrise.
Oh, I didn't know.
Yes, because he was gonna prove that doctor wrong. There is a lot of his polio that is unclear in the literature, but it's not, it was a very vivid memory to Daddy. And only one place have I heard that he would, when he was recovering, he would wheel his wheelchair in the fall, a year and a few months after he had polio. And he would tip his wheelchair over, and he would crawl in the fields that had already been cropped, so there was just these stubbles.
Yeah.
And he would crawl as far until he was totally exhausted across the field. As soon as everybody left, that's what he would do. And when he told me that, and I don't remember what I said, but I remember one of the things he said about that. He said he wanted to be strong, to be healthy, to walk again. And when you want something badly enough, there is nothing you won't do to get it. And that impressed me. He would do anything to learn to walk again. He went to college. He took his famous canoe trip, which he wouldn't talk about unless you asked him. He kept a very detailed diary, and I didn't read the diary until after his death.
Neither did I.
Right. And it was amazing how you can see the man in the words of this young, unsophisticated boy. That to me is absolutely astonishing. He muses over, time is the only thing that we have, and we spend so much time frivolously. And part of it is the speaking of a young man who is contemplating the meaning of life, which is what you're supposed to do when you're 20 or so. But part of it is things that never change, how he observed the people he met, and how he really observed them, and then wrote down his observations about them, and why he understood that mothering, when you overmother, it is not good. She is so protective of her daughter that her daughter is not having the fulsome experience of becoming an adult. And this is from a young boy. It was absolutely amazing. Mattie Richport, Jay's wife, made a film about Daddy, and she asked, one of the questions she asked me, and you too, was when did you know your father was crippled? Now, I rubber banded his feet to his bicycle pedals when I was a little girl. or his foot, because he couldn't ride a bicycle without his foot coming off it. And I didn't know he was crippled until my wedding day, when I started to do the bridal, the bride's walk, and he wouldn't keep in step, and I looked at him and he said, I can't. And I thought, holy smoke, my father's crippled. And you discovered, you were younger than I when you discovered it.
Yeah, but actually it's a very long story.
What?
But it was.
Condense it.
Went to Lost Pond Canyon. No, it wasn't camping. Went to Lost Pond Canyon, which was 4 hours from Phoenix. But anyway, we get to Lost Pond Canyon, and it's a pretty bad, nasty hike up to the canyon. You go across things, and I can remember at one point Dad was on one end of his cane, and I'm pulling on the other end of his cane to pull him up to wherever it was, and I'm thinking, I let go of this cane, he's crippled. I can't let go of this cane. He's crippled. And that was really the first time I knew it. But it was a pretty bad hike, which my dad made, and it was the last real hike he ever did.
Uncle Julius's wife told Daddy that we will send you to college or medical school. Take your choice. Daddy and his sister that he was closest to his whole life, Aunt Bert, went to the library and checked out a book on good manners because they knew they were from a farm family and weren't sophisticated. And in the book it said that a gentleman, when he calls on a lady, has his hat and gloves. So he and Aunt Bert went to the store and bought those white cotton gloves with the knit cuffs. And then he went, I guess by train, to Uncle Julius's house, and the butler let him in. And what touched Daddy's heart, he said, the butler took my straw hat and my white cotton gloves and put the gloves inside the hat and carried it away on the silver serving tray, just as though it were a normal, everyday occurrence. Which you can draw whatever conclusion you want, and so, but I just think nice people abound. But that touched his heart as he got older. Because they gave him the money, and then that was it. He put himself through the other one. But the story is that he did it all. I'm not taking anything away from him. This is just the way it was. And he did run a boarding house for the students, whether it was medical school or college. And he did that so he'd have a place to live. And he also, go back to the story of tipping himself out of his wheelchair and crawling, because if you want something badly enough, you will do it, no matter what it takes. And one of the things he told me, which I didn't like hearing, but I really, as I've gotten older and wiser, I realized you want something bad enough, you're going to do it, was he would tell the people who could afford, the students, who were rich enough to afford living in his boarding house, that food was food and he could eat anything. And they used to make bets about making concoctions of various foods and then betting whether or not Daddy would eat the ensuing disgusting messes. Imagine having to set your pride aside enough to eat garbage, mess, awful stuff, green beans and chocolate pudding, all mixed up. But the underlying, because Daddy, how could you do that? Because food is food. and it gets in your belly and it is all mixed up anyway, which is true, which is factual information. But the thing that I took from it is, again, you want something bad enough, you will do it. I don't know much about his first wife. And it wasn't a forbidden topic, it just wasn't relevant. Because when Daddy left, Carol, my sister Carol was 2, and Lance was 5.
And Bert was 8.
And Bert, no, everybody's odd except
Okay,
me.
right.
And Bert was 7 and Bert was 9. So they were youngsters. Now, Bert has a lot of memories of his mother, his birth mother, and virtually Lance has very spotty, and of course Carol had none. And he left when Carol, before Carol was 2, that I know. And then went to Michigan.
But he took the kids with him.
Took the kids with him. He had full custody of the children, which I find astonishing.
In that period, really.
In that period,
Yeah.
yes.
Yes, and I do know that Helen's father testified against her in the custody fight.
Yeah, he told me that once when I was in my 20s. He was telling me about that, how he is eternally grateful for his first wife's father.
Mhm.
Because he testified for Dad to have the kids.
Then he met my mother, and that story is reasonably well known. He was at a conference at Wayne State University, and my mother was attending that conference with her older brother. And she was a psychology student, and Daddy looked out the window and he saw Mama walking with her brother, and he said, "That's who I'm going to marry."
And the guy said to Nixon, "What's her name?" And he says, "I don't know, but I'll find out."
Okay, now, if you want to wonder about how pervasive a talker my Daddy was, Mama was the Mama was the sheltered daughter, middle child with a big brother and a little brother, of an attorney father and his wife who had been a teacher of the deaf, but had to retire when she got married. Very sheltered. Daddy was almost 15 years older, walked with a cane, and had 3 children. Mama had never cooked a meal in her lifetime. On her college graduation day, she got in his car and they eloped with the clothes on her back, and she came home 3 days later to pick the stuff up out of her room. Mm-hmm. Now, that to me is an amazing tribute to the power of love, and what an incredible, persuasive talker Dad could be. Because can you imagine stepping out into a no man's land like that? She'd never cooked a meal in her life, and now she's going to be a mother to 3 small children. Mm-hmm. And she was. people, the psychiatrists, the medical organization didn't like him because he was so different. Imagine the psychiatrist who didn't follow any well-schooled, well-supported
The blue book.
Yes, who didn't follow the
Didn't follow the rules.
didn't follow any of the rules, who made his own rules, who did such things as have a patient take his son to Encannel Park to go fishing, who had a patient live in the house periodically, who did all kinds of strange things. I can remember making birthday cakes for patients without any knowledge of why I was making them. As an adult, I can look back and see that these were people, you know, these kind of people that have never had anybody make them a birthday cake in their whole entire lifetime, which was easy for me to do, and I liked it, and they liked it, and who populated the next door rooming house with his patients.
And at one time in the early 60s, populated Mrs. Jennings.
And the alley behind.
And the alley behind, and one was over in Mrs. Call's.
So he didn't have any friends, which is almost like heresy to say, but he really didn't. Now, he had a busy and a full life, but I really believe that part of his teaching pursuit with hypnosis, and the hypnosis was his life. He was always quite surprised that he was well known for being a therapist rather than hypnosis, when hypnosis is really what he devoted his life to.
But he did a lot of therapy without hypnosis.
No, Allan, here's where.
All right, you're probably right on that.
Now, the formal trance is absolutely less than 10%. Or that's what most people say, and I'll believe that. But there wasn't a patient in his office that was not in a trance, period. And I can say that flatly, that if you came into Daddy's office, you were giving implicit permission to learn from him. And if you learn from him, the best way to learn is to be in a trance. He perfected, and this is one of his greatest gifts to the world, I think, is he perfected the naturalistic trance, which has every quality of a formal trance. And he taught, that's how he taught, that's how he did therapy. That's one of the reasons he could make his patients do such, to me, crazy things, like wet the bed before they go to sleep at night. Who's going to do that? And I remember asking him once, Daddy, how do you make your patients do what you make them do? Crazy what he made them do. And this was a question he answered directly for me. He thought for a moment and he said, they do what I tell them to do because they know I have their welfare at heart. They know I know what I'm doing, and they know I am doing the right thing for them. Now, you cannot, in my opinion, create that certainty in another person without a trance. Because trance is the ultimate of communication. Now, when I say that...
All right, then I agree
absolutely.
with you. I agree with him because he did communicate those things that you just said.
Now, but I think he made I think one of the benefits of his teaching and the seminars and then the beginning of ASH, I think was because then he had colleagues all over, rather than trying his best to make friends, which he wasn't going to make friends in Phoenix, because he didn't toe the line, and a lot of medicine is very orthodox. And he wouldn't participate in some of what they did. People would ask him, what is hypnosis? What is this? What are you doing? Sometimes about technique, as you say, but I can't tell you how many people say, well, your father never answered a direct question.
Yes, he did.
Well, I agree.
If you look at those tapes, it's true.
Of course, he did. The direct questions he did not, or the questions he did not directly answer, in my opinion, were the questions that had answers that you could not understand. Now, Bateson and Daddy had a friendship for quite some years, and he referred a huge number of his students to Dad for learning, and said, after quite some time, that he was sorry he had referred anybody, because many of the students took the object. You know how the Zen Buddhists point and say, look at that, and the student looks at the hand rather than the moon? Because many of the students forgot to look at they tried to make it into techniques, rather than to understand that it's not the technique. The techniques are not what Dad's was trying to teach people. It's the ability. It's not this, as I'm pointing at the moon. It's not my hand. It's the moon. And if you don't remember to look at the moon, then you've missed the whole point. And Bateson thought, rightly or wrongly, I'm not getting in the middle of this one, but Bateson believed that many of the students completely mistook it. Bandler and Grinder were very interesting.
Yes.
And in fact, we called them the nice one and the other one.
I didn't know them to that degree. I happened to come, this was 1972, and I just had my daughter, and I was taking her out to Phoenix to show my daughter off, and they happened to be there at the same time, and I watched a few of the early recordings.
I'm on the first recording that they ever did. And what their premise was, which a lot of people don't know, but their premise was study genius and market genius to the masses, which is an oxymoron in itself. Daddy didn't want tapes made of him, and Herb finally talked him into it by saying, if you don't make a good tape, there will a professional quality tape, there will never be one made, so you better make it now. And Daddy actually said, I'm too old. I don't want tapes made of me, because it was not real Daddy. I'm going to swing back to this at the end of this. They filmed a tape of a trance, and then they analyzed what Daddy had done. And in my opinion, this was the beginning of a lot of corruption.
A lot of what?
Corruption. Because they would take a sentence and they would parse it down and make it smaller and then make each word mean something significant. Now, Daddy was good, but each word that he said was not of high significance. And it just wasn't. So he would take the trance, and a lot of trance, a good trance work, there's a lot of even what Daddy called patter, where you just talk away to distract them from what your real goal is. So, and you just like a magician has pattern. You just talk.
Yeah,
Fill
diversion.
the noise, fill the space, so that their unconscious can do what you want them to do, or what you have set up to have done. And it is multi-level, but every word does not have significance. They did not, Daddy never said, I know for a fact, his words, they understand me better than I understand myself. Because they didn't understand him.
And Dad would not have said that, and I watched them there the first time in Phoenix doing the reporting, and I was picking up, and I'm a heck of a lot worse at this than my dad, and I was picking up things that didn't quite add up. I was having a discussion with my mother about some of his brief interventions, and my mother put me in my place and expressed her frustration. She's saying that she doesn't like these brief interventions written about so much, because that Dad had some patients for years, worked with him very hard over the years. He did not have brief interactions with them, and they walk in unhealed and they walk out healed from the office.
Yes, that was not
It was
vast majority of his clients. But that's the legend, that's the myth.
and that she was, and I understood her completely, because I'd see, sometimes not even know their names over the years, but I'd see the same people come year after year after year, and him work with him at whatever their problem was, which I don't have the foggiest notion, and work very hard with them. So there was all types of patients, some who never get healed, but he's helping the best he can, or the best anybody can. As Dad said to me once, they have to do the hard work, I just showed them the way.
What is your response to the fact, to the question that I say, your opinion on the 70s, that it was not your father? You were not there. You were not there. You had your own life, you had your own children, and you were not there to study what happened in the 70s when your father developed this metaphorical way of thinking.
You came to study for 1 week, and I knew him for 40 years before he died. Who knows him best? Secondly, I was too there in the 70s. I had a military husband, and when he was gone, guess where I moved back home to?
By what right do you sit there and tell me how I am interacting with my father? He was my father. I interacted with him my whole life. I didn't stop interacting with him in the 70s. I knew my father in the 40s. I knew my father in the 50s. I knew my father in the 60s. Now in the 50s, I will say I was a teenager part of those times, and we did have a disconnect, as all teenagers do, but I knew him in the 60s. I knew him in the 70s. He was my father. By what right do you have to ask me that question?
In my knowledge, he muted himself because the muting that had to take place, go back to the story I told of the marriage that he sort of symphony conducted. Okay. Can you imagine telling a client, a patient, or a student that that is the right way to be therapy, and then never seeing that student again? That's totally irresponsible. And he would not do that with his students.
The students, B.A. made a super good point. The students were there for a week or 2 weeks at the absolute outside. And are you, as she says, are you telling me that your 1 week knowledge outranks my 40 years.
And
Come on, let's use the common sense.
even people who studied with him at length, and some of them are excellent. I am not saying that these people are not good. I'm really not. Some of them are absolutely excellent.
Yes, they
And
are. I have great respect.
Great
for-
respect. But you can't know what is not presented to you. And in the 70s, Daddy, I believe it was a conscious decision, made a decision to be more muted's the best word, muted in the way he presented his vision of therapy. Because you can't tell people to do things and then never see them again. You just can't.
You can't.
You can tell them bits and pieces of directness, but you can't give them the full flavor of I am going to help you. You can't do it. I didn't used to believe a lot of Daddy's patients because Daddy had these fantastic stories and fantastic cures and everything. And I was his daughter, and I used to think, oh, they're all exaggerated. Well, they're not. After his death at this seminar, even now it still happens, and I'm very interested to see if it happens at the upcoming Erickson conference. First, it was just a never-ending stream. But people would come to me, they'd find me, and they'd flip their name tag about half the time so I couldn't tell who they were. And they would say, I want to tell you what your father told to me. It was almost verbatim from each person. I want to tell you what your father told me. And they'd touch me, and they'd be looking at me, and they'd say, never a prelude. They'd say, your father told me. And then they would tell me what they remembered. And they'd say, it changed my life. And they would always, their eyes would be moist, and there would be tears for most of them. And then they'd continue to touch me, and they'd say, I just wanted to let you know. And then they'd turn around and they'd walk away. It was like it was the closing of a loop. And those words that he would tell them that became part of their being, it wasn't that they came into his office and sat down and told him their problem and he would come up with a magical phrase.
Because sometimes the phrase did not even, I remember one of them fairly closely, and they didn't always make sense.
Right. And it was part of the therapy that was the complex of knowing the person, getting connected with them, where he would say something, and sometimes I am dead certain that just like when y'all do therapy, it is something that you don't remember saying, but for some reason it fits exactly.
We had two ways into my dad's office. The easy way, which everyone took, was front door to the living room, and then when your time came, you walk across the dining room into his office, which is the back of the house. But there was another way in. You would walk from the living room into the hallway, across the master bedroom, across my bedroom. The only way into my bedroom was through the master bedroom, back to the end of my bedroom and through a door that was kept locked 90% of the time, 99% of the time. No one used it, so the corner tended to collect stuff. And one day, when I was about 12 or 13, my dad comes to me and says, I'm going to have a patient walk into the office this way. And he wanted to check out that my lounge chair was out of the way, that everything was ready, and we walked into the room, and we walked out, and I had to unlock the bolt from the door and this and that. And we got all ready, and then I looked around and I said to my dad, "Don't you want me to take down the Playboy pinups?" And he looked at me and said, "Good grief, why do you think I'd bring her through here?" And that told me a lot, so I left my Playboy pinups up. Now, Playboy pinups in that day and age, of course, were infinitely more modest than they are nowadays.
Another way that Dad had of joining the person in the person's language, because if you don't talk what is relevant to them, they will respond not authentically. So this very obese lady came in the office and sat down, and she was wearing a polka dotted dress. And she sat there and she said something about how she wanted to lose weight. And Daddy said, for anybody who is sensitive about their weight, only he didn't use the word sensitive, why in the world are you wearing a dress with polka dots? Millions of polka dots, thousands of polka dots. Everywhere I look, there's polka dots and polka dots and polka dots. So many polka dots. And he spent quite some time insulting the lady's taste and the fact that anybody who was fat would wear billions of polka dots. And when he was all done insulting her about her millions of polka dots, he sat and she waited. And she said, well, maybe I don't really want to lose weight. But not a hostile, well, maybe I really don't. But, you know, a thoughtful. And Dad said, well, then why don't you go home and in a week come back having gained weight, and then we can begin to talk, maybe. So she went home, and she was gone for 2 weeks, and she came back, and she had gained 5 pounds. And Dad said, what do you want from me? And she was not wearing a polka dotted dress. And she said, I'm pretty sure I want to lose weight. And Dad said, well then, go home and gain 2 more pounds. So she did. And then she came back and she said, yes, I'm now convinced I want to lose weight. And he said, well, gain 2 more pounds, and then maybe we'll talk. So after she gained like 15 pounds, which really doesn't make a difference if you weigh 300 pounds, then Daddy said, well, you know what you've shown me? And she said, what? And Daddy says, you've shown me that you have control over what you eat. And then she went, as I understand it, through a very successful diet. But that is so counterintuitive. And that's what takes a lot of guts to be able to do. Because you really, I don't have the courage to do that.
My dad had a patient that my wife has never met, but regrets.
Oh.
He was...
Call him Mr. H.
Mr. H. Mr. H would come in, and he had true post-traumatic stress disorder. There was no if and ors about it. I do not know anything about it, but this was a war casualty, and he was coming to my dad to attempt to get his life as much back in order as he could. And I don't know too much about whether it was successful or not, but he had an annoying habit. He would come into the waiting room, the living room, and he'd make big, huge spitballs, which my mother hated. And then he'd semi-hide them in various places around the room. And my mother would come in to straighten up the magazine or something, and she'd find this spitball. She'd say something like, even if Mr. H was there, she'd say, "This is terrible." And he'd go, "Terrible, terrible, terrible." And so that's the only thing he would say about them. And so it became a catch line in the family, and the reason my wife does not like Mr. H is because when I misbehave and she lectures me, I merely say, "Terrible, terrible."
Now, this had nothing to do with Daddy's working with them. These were the patients who let us see their foibles and their problems. And they were all, I can assure you, they were all liked. We liked them all. Now you can look at this as Daddy telling people what to do. I don't think he told them, I think he set it up so it was the next logical step for them to do. Now, this is not that's not technique. There's no technique.
There's no technique. Well, there's technique in that you do the hard work necessary to understand what you have to do.
Well, what you have to offer.
Excuse me, you're right, what you have to offer. But you have to do the hard work necessary to figure out what you can make an offer.
Because the goal of therapy is to enhance people's lives and to make your life more complete for you, as long as it doesn't harm anyone else, because the only real sin is using another person without their consent, kind of thing. So he would manage, that's in quotation marks, his patients, he would give them options that were good for what they were, what they needed, that would expand their lives and their perceptions, which is what good therapy really is. But he would do it so that it was their idea. He would set it up, but it was their idea, because the essence of a lot of Ericksonian work is that you set it up, you trust, and you get out of the way, so that they become wedded to their own independence and their own security in their own decisions that work out for them. This makes me insane, because then you have people saying things like, "Well, I told him to suck his thumb and it didn't work." Well, like, duh, of course it didn't work, because you have to have the context, you have to have the connection, you have to do it right.
And you have to do the hard work to figure out what is right.
And you have to offer it, and then you have to shut your mouth and let them take what you have given and make it theirs. Because you can't tell people what to do. But the ability to make people blink, it can't be a technique. It grows from the connection, not a technique. And when people believe that it is a part of Ericksonian psychotherapy to come up with the magic statement, they are, in fact, they don't get it. And secondly, they disrespect what it really is. But so he did do these magic statements, but he didn't do them on walk in the room,
Without the
tell me your
context.
problem, without the context and knowing the person, and many years experience and thinking, because he thought a lot. And I also sincerely believe that the connection he was able to have with people was so intense that when he'd connect, the truth of what he said would sink into your heart. Techniques is not what it is. And a hypnotic trance is not what it is. What it is it's how much are we communing? The connection of that depth, I believe, was a huge portion of the magic aura around Daddy.
Yeah.
And if you can't communicate and connect at that level, you can do fabulous techniques and you can help people and you can give them new information and you can teach them and on and on and on. But the difference between therapy and healing is vital. Therapy is what I, or the doctor, do to you. Healing is what you do to you. And I can put a cast on your broken arm, but you have to heal it. But I want to add Louis to this, because Louis is the one who said, if we don't get this information down of the early Erickson, I'm going to use your phrasing on this. He said, because I've known him for a while, he says, you know, B.A., you're getting old. And pretty soon you're going to die. And then who's going to be able to tell this story? And I thought, son of a gun, he's right. And this is part of what should be told and known about.
And emphasized.
And emphasized about Daddy. And Louis, I am in your debt forever because you put it together, because you recognized that this is important information to the Ericksonian world. He is the only one who has really wanted or done this type of thing.
Who
was
wanted
Erickson?
the real information from the 40s and 50s, where he was,
And
in my
60s.
opinion, and 60s, where he was, in my opinion, very innovative and different.
And at his peak of professional acumen, he was good, and him on an old and bad day is better than 99% of the people around. But the information about Daddy in his prime, and Allan and I only have a small piece of that information, but a small piece is better than nothing. And I thank you, Louis, for doing this very, very much.